This might be the most befuddling, the most difficult to grasp. I'm going to try to make it clear and plain. How to use a proper teaching method. And I'm going to share how I do it. What is a teaching method? A teaching method is a general strategy or plan that guides your instruction. Lecture method, discussion, task-based. These are general approaches in the class, general sort of focus, and then within that you have different activities. These are different types of general teaching methods. We have the general aim. The general aim is what we talked about the first two classes, which is establishing the topic. What is it you want to share? I've suggested, in order to stay focused, to put a title and then rephrase it as a question. And that keeps you focused. And I'm going to tell you why that's important a bit later. But if you're able to get better at asking questions, it will dramatically improve the efficiency of your classroom, of your teaching, of any method you decide to choose, as well as the performance of your students. So my method in this lecture, and it would only be fair to talk about my method if we're talking about methods, is a mixed method approach. I'm lecturing with examples and I'm having interactive discussions. So the topic is first conditional. When we pick a topic, immediately I ask a lot of questions about the learners, about the situation, about obviously my knowledge, how to use first conditional. If I'm teaching young students, like teenagers, I might try to get them excited with an interesting title, like how to use first conditional with your friends. And they'll go, oh, okay. Title automatically gives me a homework, is to use at least one conditional with one friend each day. And you're going to come back and talk about one of those. If you have a more serious approach, you might use something like this: how to form first conditional. And then I'm going to expect this lesson to be heavily grammar-based, with you explaining a lot, preferably with examples. Let's talk about the more friendlier tones. So what are the most common cases of first conditional amongst friends? Now, as I'm doing this, I'm already thinking of things. Meetings, if it rains, that sort of thing. Meetings, activities, you know, sport. If you're older, you might go on holiday with your friends. It depends the age group. You've got to be sensitive here. But already, as I even ask the question, already ideas come to my mind. If it's a focused question, you can quickly build your lesson. If it's general, let me tell you where you're going to have problems. If it's general, watch this. How to use first conditional. This is a much different question than how to use first conditional with your friends, because you immediately start thinking about your friends and the situations you could use it in. And suddenly putting a lesson plan together is easy because you have friends too, not just your students. And if I say amongst friends, I'm going to focus on the communication aspect of it. So we're going to learn first conditional with friends in a very maybe not conversational, but communication manner. So they're going to, they might do some role playing with their neighbor, but they're going to do a lot of practicing. So we'll intersperse, this is a nice word, the grammar in the conversations and, you know, error correction sort of things. Intersperse means put inside. Some of you have a communicative method. Others of you more lecture-based grammar methods because of the national exams and how they're set. But I just want you to know, you don't have to be a great expert in this. I just want you to make you aware that there are distinctions between activities within the class and the general method, which sort of groups all those activities inside it. To demystify the process of selecting a method for your class. Demystify means to make more understandable. And I want to show you that, in fact, at least how I go about it isn't that difficult. You have to use one or two or whatever approach that is logical, that makes sense, that you can defend if a student or a teacher or a parent comes and says, why did you teach that topic this way? And you should have a good answer. Again, nothing dramatic. I'm lecturing, I'm giving examples, and we're having some interactive discussion. This is homework from this week. Now, keep in mind, they have not mentioned a method yet. We're going to put the method on afterwards. But as I've suggested in meetings 1 and 2, if we don't get the title and question and sort of transition right, the best method in the world isn't going to save this lesson. So if I ask that question, I'm going to then identify what I consider to be the most difficult phrases and then try to find some interesting parallels and links. And honestly, I will choose ones that make a nice unified theme that people can remember at the end of the lesson. The more you unify your lesson, the more memorable it becomes later. So the more broad it is, the less people remember. Easier if you focus on reading as a skill or an exercise and then listening. So if you combine all of them together, sometimes it can confuse the student. They've got a lot of different information. I like to break it down simple and say, all right, now we're going to focus on reading for the first part. And then listen, you can use the textbook. I'm going to suggest that if you ask 2 questions, it infinitely complicates things. I'm going to give another marriage analysis because it's just funny. So if I want, now listen, imagine you're the bride, I'm the groom. I'm sorry, you're the girlfriend, I'm the boyfriend. And I say, would you like to marry me? Where would you like to go on the honeymoon? I've asked 2 questions. Would you like to marry me? Where would you go on the honeymoon? And suddenly, okay, now, well, okay, which one should I answer first? You know, and it's just a lot more difficult to answer 2 questions at once. The question we're asking today is how to find a suitable method. And the way you find a suitable method is have a very clear focus on what you actually want to teach. Then you have a really easy opportunity to find a suitable method. Now, in a lot of textbooks, you have the method already laid out for you. They give it to you. But you know, we have options when it comes to reading, for example. These are different methods, reading methods that we can employ on that text. And the textbooks don't always tell you how to employ the reading methods, so you can use any of these that you want. And what's interesting about methods is that you always want to ask yourself, will the skill that we develop from this be applicable in their life? Can they use it? Here's what I do at university. I say this. I say, listen, I'm asking you in this exercise to read for detail. Does anyone know why I want you to develop this skill? And then they mumble a few things, or some of them speak very cogently, and they give me an answer. And inevitably, one person will say, yeah, because we can use it in the future. And then I give them, I agree, and I give them a real life example. If you're in an interview, and I'm interviewing you, and I ask you about my company or the history of, you know, my company in relation to your company, if you can provide interesting, that's key, relevant, key, detail, that tells me you've read, you have an ability to think and analyze deeply. This skill is coveted. Coveted means held in high esteem. This skill is coveted with every international company you ever apply for, if the job is good. If you don't like the topic, it doesn't matter. Develop the skill of reading deeply, reading for detail. The smartest person in the room is always listened to. So what I'm doing is I'm selling them on my method. And you know what? When I make it relevant to their life, they take it more seriously. It can be selfish. You can choose a method that you prefer. I think that is fine as long as you can justify its importance.
Please give us some definition about the 5th method, reciprocal teaching.
Reciprocity means one to another. So the teacher and the student both sort of teach each other, which is sort of what we did here. This is reciprocal teaching. When I asked you here in point number 3, do you see point number 3? What you thought of that I didn't think of? This is reciprocal teaching. This is where now you become the teacher and you say, Professor, here's something I thought of that I haven't heard yet discussed. And I think that's interesting. And you give students a little bit more, you give them more credence, you value, you know, they feel more valued when you put them in the role of the teacher. Sometimes they're not qualified. I think you have to be very careful when you do this. The same for listening. Someone mentioned shadowing before. It's not a method, it's an activity. It can be both, I think. But again, when we're choosing a method like listening or reading, I think it can be very flexible. I think this is where it gets very interesting. You can't improve writing if you're not writing. Interestingly, let me give you one example of how teachers let this go. One example. Teachers will often give short writing exercises in the class. But what the teachers will do is they will accept an answer from a student, oftentimes the smartest students, by the way, and they haven't written anything. They're answering it off the top of their head. Okay, so how would you write this? And then the smart student, I've seen it over and over and over. They'll say, oh, I know. And then they'll create the sentence in their head. And let me tell you, they are not improving their writing and they're wasting everyone's time. You can't criticize and help them because it hasn't been written. And let me tell you, speaking and writing produce very different results. You improve writing by writing. You improve speaking not by hearing me speak. I mean, you can indirectly, but you most directly improve your speaking when you're speaking. I need solid teaching. I want to see what your focus is. I want to see the method you're using. And I want to see if you carry out that method in the class. Not just write it on a paper. Are they actually writing? Or are they just speaking things off the top of their head? Because I know one thing. They haven't improved their writing at all. Zero. But they might leave there and say, oh, what a great lesson. If I'm teaching university students, I know they have to develop their thinking because they think too general, it's too broad. They'll say stuff like this. Give you another example. The internet is everywhere. That's how they'll start their essay to grab me. The internet is everywhere. Well, everyone knows that. That's so obvious, but I'm not upset or I don't think that. I just have to educate them and say, listen, if you say something very obvious to people, they're going to look at you like, is he okay? Is everything fine with him? Let me give you an example. Let me give you a real obvious one. Do you know we need oxygen to breathe and live? Do we need oxygen to live? Do you know that? And I mean, people are like, is he on something? You know what thinking people do? They think, all right, if that's how this talk begins, it's not going to end well. So I will just get up and leave now. I can predict very early on how a talk or a paper is going to go based on the introduction.